2014 in Hong Kong wasn't just a series of large demonstrations, which you see on the left. Rather, the young people, and here we're talking school kids, built with their tents an organised alternative city, complete with garbage collection and makeup in the women's bathroom, that for a time offered a heterotopia, or a space that contested the principles of the Hong Kong city around it, not the mainland government, but the hyper-developed, choking, pollution-ridden, car-dominated Hong Kong city. That's what I mean by a lived aesthetic. And as people think about this, and I talked about this to my students, some people are remembering the famous subculture that thrived in Paris and some other cities under Nazi occupation in early 1940s, the Zazu. These are pictures of Zazu. The Nazis decreed austerity in clothing. These people used as much fabric as they could get hold of. The Nazis required short hair. They developed fabulous tall coiffure. And disciplined living, and particularly appropriate behaviour for occupied people, instead of doing that, they threw wild parties. They did swing, they did jazz. The Zazu were often beaten up, and that by Nazis, by Germans, and that became more pronounced towards the end of the occupation. But in one spectacular act of solidarity, when the Germans imposed the wearing of yellow stars on Jewish people, the Zazu made their own and wore their own. There are also ones that say swing instead. How much time have I got?
We are almost there.
Okay. Very quickly, there's a similar refusal going on in a movement in Iraq, Iraqi Kurdistan today, the gentlemen's clubs. And apart from, they claim to be reviving traditional Effendi or nobleman culture, but they promote the work of female fashion designers and say that they stand for women's rights. But of course, not all of these movements have the kind of politics I might like. There's another one, the alt-right in the United States, has a similar mode of organisation. Steampunk, the movement where people combine a kind of post-apocalyptic futurist imagination with clothing or adaptations of clothing and technology from the age of steam. Now, so here's our question: what do we make of this? My Department of Gender and Cultural Studies in Sydney has quite a few students who do research with these sorts of groups, and they're relatively small. Other groups are ecologically minded communities that form around things like vintage clothing, the rediscovery of sewing, home sewing and craft, sustainable fashion, which is actually an economic area where you can make a career, and on the dietary side, vegan culture. Now this does not stir my imagination, none of it. I grew up before consumerism, before sewerage, before refrigeration, and when making your own was not a choice. So I don't particularly like it, but I've learned from the students why dismissing their experiments in living as bourgeois or as trivial misses the horizon of serious and variably universal issues that they face most immediately in Australia: climate change. I could pick a lot of things, but climate change presses with very immediate force upon us now, with fire and flood, devastating cities as well as small towns, with dying reefs, with eroding coastlines. Of course, climate climate change is closer still in neighbouring Pacific islands that are already sinking beneath waves.